The trading post on Kepler 442b hummed with the usual chaos of interstellar commerce. Merchants from a dozen species hawked their wares while translators buzzed overhead, converting guttural Vorthak growls into melodic Zilani songs. The air thick with the scent of exotic spices and the metallic tang of fusion batteries being recharged. Captain Sarah Chun stood at the edge of the main bazaar, her weathered hands wrapped around a steaming cup of what the locals called coffee, but tasted more like liquid copper. She watched the crowd with the practiced eye of someone who had survived 20 years of deep space trading runs. Her ship, the Terran Dawn, sat in Dock Bay 7, loaded with Earth textiles and waiting for clearance to the Outer Rim colonies. The Kepler station served as neutral ground for species that would normally tear each other apart on sight. The Galactic Trade Council maintained strict rules here. No weapons, no violence, no settling of blood debts within the station's rotating hull. It worked, mostly, because everyone had something to gain from peaceful trade. Sarah noticed the Kithra delegation before most others did. They moved through the crowd like shadows, their obsidian-black skin absorbing the artificial sunlight streaming through the station's transparent aluminum dome. Standing nearly 8 feet tall, the Kithra were apex predators from a world where everything wanted to kill everything else. Their razor-sharp claws remained sheathed in ceremonial silver caps, a requirement for station entry. But everyone knew how quickly those caps could come off. The crowd instinctively parted as the Kithra passed. Conversations died. Even the bold Vorthak traders, who feared nothing in their home systems, suddenly found their merchandise fascinating enough to require intense examination. The Kithra had that effect on people. They were the bogeymen of the galaxy, the species that made hardened space marines wake up in cold sweats. But Sarah had seen something in the Kithra delegation that others missed. Walking behind the 3 adults, barely reaching their waist height, was a youngling. The little one couldn't have been more than 10 standard years old, his obsidian skin still bearing the silver markings of childhood. Unlike the adults who moved with predatory grace, the youngling stumbled occasionally, his oversized feet still growing into his frame. The Kithra rarely brought their young to trade stations. Their culture valued strength above all else, and exposing children to other species was considered a sign of weakness. Sarah wondered what desperate circumstances had forced them to break that tradition. The answer came when she overheard their conversation at the medical supply vendor 3 stalls down. The Kithra spoke in their native tongue, but Sarah's translator implant caught enough to understand. The youngling was sick. Not just sick, dying. Some kind of genetic disorder that their medical technology couldn't cure. They needed human medical supplies, specifically the quantum cellular regenerators that only Earth's biotech companies produced. The vendor, a nervous Tellurian with 6 arms and a reputation for fair dealing, was trying to be diplomatic. The regenerators were expensive, worth more than most ships. The Kithra had brought rare metals from their homeworld, but not nearly enough. The adults' frustration was palpable, their barely contained aggression making nearby traders edge away nervously. Sarah found herself walking toward them before she realized she had made the decision. Her logical mind screamed warnings about getting involved with Kithra politics, but something about the youngling's wide, frightened eyes reminded her of her own daughter, lost in a transport accident 5 years ago. The conversation stopped when she approached. 3 sets of predatory eyes fixed on her with the kind of attention usually reserved for prey. The youngling peeked out from behind one of the adults, curiosity overcoming fear. "I couldn't help overhearing," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fact that any one of these creatures could tear her apart without breaking a sweat. "The medical supplies you need. I might be able to help." The largest Kithra, obviously the leader, studied her for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was like gravel grinding against steel. "You are human. Your species has no reason to help ours." Sarah shrugged. "Maybe not. But that kid doesn't look like he has time for species politics." The admission hit harder than she expected. The adult Kithra exchanged glances, some form of silent communication passing between them. The leader stepped closer, and Sarah fought every instinct telling her to run. At this distance, she could see the intricate scarring on his arms, ritual markings that told the story of countless battles. "What do you want in return?" he asked. "Passage to the Outer Rim," Sarah said. Your ships are faster than mine, and I've got cargo that needs to reach New Sydney before the season ends. It was a reasonable trade, even advantageous for her. Kythera vessels could make the journey in half the time her old freighter required. But she could see the suspicion in their eyes. In their experience, nothing came without a price, especially not kindness from other species. The youngling stepped forward then, tugging on the leader's arm with a boldness that surprised everyone. He whispered something in their language, too quick for Sarah's translator to catch. The leader's expression softened almost imperceptibly. The youngling says you have the scent of sadness, the leader translated. He believes you understand loss. Sarah felt her throat tighten. The Kythera were known for their heightened senses, able to detect emotional states through pheromones and body language. If the child could sense her grief, there was no point in hiding it. I had a daughter once, she said simply. The admission hung in the air between them like a bridge neither species knew how to cross. The Kythera valued strength, but they also understood family bonds. In their culture, the death of young ones was considered the greatest tragedy imaginable. The leader's scarred hand moved to rest on the youngling's head, a gesture of protection that transcended species barriers. When he looked at Sarah again, something had changed in his eyes. You would do this thing, he said. Help our young one, even knowing what we are. I know what you are, Sarah replied. The question is, do you know what you are to him? The leader was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications of her words. Around them, the station continued its business, but Sarah felt as though they existed in a bubble of possibility, a moment where the future could shift in any direction. Finally, the leader nodded. We will consider your offer. But know this, human. If you betray us, if this is some trap, there is nowhere in the galaxy you can hide from Kythera justice. Sarah met his gaze without flinching. If I wanted to hurt you, I wouldn't have walked over here. I'd have called station security and let them deal with 3 Kythera traveling with illegal genetic material. The statement hit like a physical blow. The adults went rigid, hands instinctively moving toward where their weapons would normally rest. Sarah had taken a massive risk revealing that she knew about their contraband, but it was the only way to prove her intentions. You knew, the leader said, his voice deadly quiet. I guessed, Sarah admitted. The way you're avoiding the main checkpoints, staying in the outer sections where security is lighter. Plus, Kythera medical technology is centuries ahead of most species. If you can't cure him with your own resources, you're dealing with something that requires genetic manipulation. That's banned on most worlds. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Sarah could feel the weight of her gamble. She had just admitted to knowing their secret while standing within arm's reach of 3 apex predators. If she had miscalculated their desperation, this conversation would be her last. The youngling broke the tension by stepping fully out from behind the adults. He looked up at Sarah with eyes that held far too much understanding for his age. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper, but it carried clearly in the sudden quiet. Will you really help me? The simple question, delivered in accented but clear standard, nearly broke Sarah's heart. She knelt down to bring herself closer to his level, ignoring the way the adults tensed at her movement. I'm going to try, she promised. But I need your guardians to trust me first. The youngling looked back at the leader, then at Sarah again. With a determination that seemed far beyond his years, he reached into a small pouch at his side and pulled out something that made Sarah's breath catch. It was a whistle, carved from what looked like bone and decorated with intricate patterns. But this wasn't just any whistle. Sarah recognized it from her xenobiology studies. It was a Kythera distress beacon, used by their young to call for help when separated from the pack. For a Kythera child, to give such a thing to an outsider was unprecedented. If I become lost, the youngling said, pressing the whistle into Sarah's palm, will you help me find my way home? The gesture sent ripples of shock through the adult Kythera. Sarah could see them struggling with concepts their culture had never prepared them for. Trust, vulnerability, the possibility that strength might sometimes come from accepting help rather than demanding it. Sarah closed her fingers around the whistle, feeling its smooth surface warm against her skin. She understood the weight of what she was being given, not just a tool, but a symbol of faith that crossed every barrier their species had built between them. Yes, she said simply. I will. The medical bay of the Terran Dawn had never hosted Kythera before, and Sarah could see the adults struggling with the confined space. Their massive frames barely fit through the doorways, and every surface seemed designed for smaller, more fragile beings. The youngling, whose name she had learned was Zyth, lay on the examination table while her ship's AI conducted preliminary scans. Dr. Yuki Tanaka had arrived on the emergency shuttle from New Geneva Station, bringing with her the quantum cellular regenerators and a lifetime of xenobiology experience. She was one of the few human doctors who had successfully treated non-human patients, though never a Kithara. The species' fierce independence and distrust of outsiders meant their medical data was virtually non-existent in human databases. The genetic damage is extensive, Dr. Tanaka